The Coca-Cola hissed open with a cheerful fizz that felt violently out of place in the sterile silence of exam room 3. Then, the pour. The syrupy liquid cascaded down Max's head, tracing the jagged scars crisscrossing his fur. It soaked into the matted tufts around the stump where his right hind leg used to be. The dog didn't move, didn't whimper, didn't even flinch. He just trembled. Dr. Victoria Preston smiled without warmth. "Oops," she said, her voice honeyed with sarcasm, as she let the empty red can clatter to the floor. It rolled gently against the table leg. Max flinched at that, not the soda. The sound. Kyle Thompson stood across the room, phone raised, already recording. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said mockingly into the lens of his iPhone, "today's features Spa Day for the Hopeless." He zoomed in on Max's face, on those wide, terrified amber eyes. #rescue fail. #don't waste resources. Megan Riley leaned against the doorframe, typing furiously on her phone, giggling. "This one's gonna go viral. His face is perfect, like a sad little war criminal." The dog pressed himself deeper into the corner. Kyle lowered his phone for a second. "You think this mud even knows we're making fun of him?" Dr. Preston didn't answer. She simply wiped a drop of soda off her manicured finger and stared down at the dog with bored disdain. A faint buzz interrupted the scene. Megan glanced at her screen. Across the hallway in the shadows, someone was watching. Sarah Martinez stood silently by the supply cabinet, her face unreadable. She had never been loud, never raised her voice. That's why they always overlooked her. But her hand moved with purpose now, sliding her phone from her pocket, thumbs dancing quickly over the screen. 15 minutes. Just 2 words. Then she slipped the phone back. The others hadn't noticed her yet. Max remained motionless, his ribs visibly rising and falling, his breath shallow. He looked like an animal long resigned to pain, a creature who had learned that endurance was safer than resistance. Dr. Preston crouched and whispered in a voice meant only for the dog, "Bet you've had worse, huh?" The room reeked of antiseptic, cruelty, and spilled cola. Outside, the soft ding of the lobby's automatic doors broke the tension like a gunshot. Megan stiffened. Sarah didn't move. She just whispered to herself. So quietly the words barely formed. Max isn't just any dog. And somewhere, less than 15 minutes away, a man had already turned his car toward the clinic. A man they had never met. A man whose name would burn through every lie they'd told and whose arrival would change everything. Max wasn't born in a home. He was born in a cage behind a shuttered auto repair shop in rural Massachusetts, where the walls bled rust and the air smelled like oil and blood. He didn't know toys, kindness, or the feel of a warm hand until later. What he did know before he was even a year old was pain, hunger, and fear. He had a number, not a name. Number 17. He had a job, not a life, to fight. By the time he was 2, Max had already survived more bouts than most dogs twice his size. He wasn't the biggest, but he was smart and fast, and above all else, silent. He never growled, never barked. He just did what was needed to survive. That's what made them keep him alive longer than most. Until one night, he didn't get up. The other dog had torn through his right hind leg so badly the bone was exposed. Number 17 collapsed and stayed down. They left him there in the mud, bleeding. Useless. And maybe that would have been the end. But someone tipped off the authorities. A raid was conducted. The ring was broken. Half the dogs were already dead. The others didn't last long in shelters. Except one. The tan and black German shepherd with fire in his eyes and a mangled limb still twitching. The vet who first saw him shook her head. "Too damaged," she said. "Put him down." But the young tech beside her, Sarah Martinez, had knelt quietly by his side, brushing the dirt away from his snout. He didn't flinch when she touched him. He just looked at her. Really looked. And, for reasons she couldn't explain, she whispered, "I'm not letting them end you here." She didn't have authority, didn't have money, but she had a name and a phone number. one she'd been given months ago for special cases. She used it. He answered on the second ring. 5 years earlier, William Hartman had been a man drowning in silence. Tech mogul, founder of Hartman Innovations. Net worth in the billions. None of it had saved his wife or daughter when the small charter boat capsized off the coast of Maine. No storm, no negligence, just a freak wave and a cruel twist of timing. They found the boat. Then the bodies. But the part of Will that mattered never resurfaced. He stopped attending board meetings, stopped speaking to the press, sold 2 of his homes, canceled everything, until one gray autumn morning, with a bottle of bourbon in his bag and a note sealed in his pocket, he stepped into an animal shelter, not to adopt, to give away what little remained in his bank account before ending it all. He hadn't expected to feel anything, but then he saw the dog. Bandaged, shaved, silent. Amber eyes meeting his without blinking. The shelter worker called him Max, said it was short for maximum risk. A joke, she added with a nervous laugh. No one had wanted him. Will hadn't spoken all morning, but when he did, it was to ask one question. What would it take to keep him alive? The TO answer, as it turned out, was a private vet team, a custom-built rehabilitation space, and a full-time handler. Will funded it all in silence. He didn't care about the money. He only cared that Max, this broken, mangled creature, was somehow still choosing to trust. That was the part he didn't understand. That's what kept him coming back. Sarah Martinez didn't ask questions. When she was approached 6 months after the rescue and offered a position at the newly formed Hartman Private Animal Rehabilitation Foundation, she accepted without hesitation. She didn't know Will's name at first. She just knew that this man had taken in the most unadoptable dog she'd ever seen and built an entire sanctuary around him. The job was clear: ensure Max's recovery and coordinate veterinary treatments through third-party clinics, maintaining absolute discretion. No one was to know who Max belonged to. No special favors, no name-dropping. Will visited Max every evening. Quiet visits, no staff, just the 2 of them. Sometimes they'd sit in the rehab garden together for hours. Will on the bench, Max at his feet, saying nothing. It was working. Max began to heal, not just physically, though the surgery had saved his life, but in ways Sarah couldn't measure. He started sleeping through the night, started playing with toys, started following Sarah's every step like a shadow. Most of all, he stopped cowering when doors opened. In time, Max wasn't just recovering, he was becoming something else, something rare. A year later, Sarah was sent to Boston Animal Medical Center for an advanced vet tech training course. She didn't plan to bring Max with her. But when his physical therapist relocated unexpectedly, Will insisted. "I trust you," he had said. "I don't trust them, but you'll be there." She agreed. Under one condition: she wouldn't reveal his identity. "Let them think I'm just the handler," she added. Will smiled faintly. "That's all they'll see anyway." So Max came with her. Every month she brought him into the sparkling white halls of Boston's most prestigious animal clinic. And every month she endured the stares, the whispers, the unspoken question: why waste time on that thing? Max didn't know, but Sarah did. He was more than a dog. He was the reason one man had chosen to live again. Boston Animal Medical Center was built like a palace. Glass walls, marble floors, receptionists in matching slate gray uniforms with iPads instead of clipboards. Every inch of the place was designed to scream one word: excellence. But like many palaces, it wasn't built for everyone. The unspoken rules started at the door. If you walked in holding a $5,000 Pomeranian with a designer leash and matching booties, you were a client. If you showed up with a 3-legged rescue mutt covered in scars, you were a burden. Dr. Victoria Preston had made sure of that. She didn't need to post a policy. She didn't have to say it aloud. She was the kind of woman who could command a room without speaking. 48 years old, always in white, hair scraped into a perfect bun so tight it looked like it hurt. Her stethoscope was monogrammed, her nails French-tipped. Her smile, when she bothered to wear one, never reached her eyes. She wasn't cruel in the cartoon villain way. She didn't shout, she didn't throw things, she simply decided who mattered, who didn't, which animals deserved her time, which didn't. Her kingdom ran on signals, raised eyebrows, pauses, the cold arch of a manicured brow, and her lieutenants understood her language fluently. Kyle Thompson had been a failed social media influencer before he was a vet assistant. At 32, he was too attractive, too arrogant, and too online. His scrub tops were fitted tight to show off his arms. His Instagram bios changed weekly. Animal advocate 1 week, future vet dad the next. But in the break room, he mocked anything that wasn't pedigreed. Another shelter special in room 2, he'd announce like he was reporting a cockroach sighting. He didn't care about medicine. He cared about metrics. If a dog was cute enough, dramatic enough, or pathetic enough, he'd film it, preferably with a snarky caption and a trending hashtag. Dr. Preston never told him to stop. She followed him, liked his videos, occasionally suggested hashtags. Megan Riley, the receptionist, had once dreamed of being a vet tech, but dreams were expensive and her scholarship had dried up after the first year. 26, sharp-tongued, always on her phone. She ran the front desk like a velvet rope at an exclusive club. She didn't ask for patient records. She scanned outfits, eyeballed shoes. If you came in with designer bags and a quiet, well-groomed Shih Tzu, she smiled like you were royalty. If you came in with a pit bull wearing a rope for a collar, her smile vanished. "Just take a seat," she'd say coldly, tapping the keyboard with perfectly polished nails. "Someone will be with you, eventually." She and Kyle had their own group chat. They called it the Pound Files. They shared photos, jokes, running commentary. Sarah Martinez wasn't in the chat, but she knew it existed. She saw everything and said nothing. Sarah had never tried to fit in. She wore plain clothes, ate lunch alone, took the late shifts no one wanted. She knew how the staff treated the rescues, especially Max, but she also knew her role. Stay quiet, stay invisible, get Max what he needs. Will had trusted her with that. She wasn't just protecting the dog, she was protecting his story. His second chance, his anonymity. If they knew who Max belonged to, they would pretend to care, pretend to be kind. But Max didn't need fake kindness. He needed truth. And the truth was, this place didn't see him as anything but a charity case. It started small. Appointment slots getting rescheduled last minute to make room for paying clients. Max being made to wait in the corner like a forgotten coat rack while show dogs got the VIP treatment. Physical therapy downgraded to when someone's available. Sarah logged it all. She kept the reports clean. Unemotional. Just facts and timestamps. She didn't want revenge. She wanted accountability. Still, something had shifted in the past few weeks. It was subtle at first. Longer delays, colder tones. But it escalated fast. One afternoon, Kyle tossed a tennis ball at Max's head in the waiting room. Said it was a test of reflexes. The next day, Megan called Max Frankenmutt within earshot of a client. Sarah kept her voice steady. When she reported it, no reaction, no apology, just silence. The next week, Dr. Preston skipped Max's checkup entirely, delegating it to an intern who didn't know how to read his chart. That's when Sarah texted Will. He didn't respond in words, just a calendar invite. Meeting 3 p.m., Boston AMC. That was the first time Sarah felt the shift in the air. Like the moment before a thunderstorm. Everything charged. Waiting. On the day of the Coca-Cola incident, Sarah knew something was off before she even walked in the door. The waiting room was unusually full. Purebreds everywhere, golden retrievers, Samoyeds, a bejeweled Siamese in a stroller. Max limped in beside her, calm as ever. Eyes alert, head low. Megan didn't look up when Sarah signed in. "Dr. Preston's running behind," she said. "The Vanderbilts brought their Pomeranian in for spa treatments. You know how it is." Sarah nodded. Max is patient. She guided him to the farthest corner, away from the others. Whispers followed them. Is that dog safe? He's only got 3 legs. He looks aggressive. Max sat quietly, watching Sarah. He never barked, never growled, just waited. When their name was finally called, it wasn't by Kyle. It was a new tech, a young man with quiet eyes and steady hands. He took Max's vitals without incident. Then they were alone in exam room 3, and time began to stretch. 10 minutes, then 20. Sarah stepped into the hallway to ask about the delay. That's when Megan smiled and said, "Kyle's gonna handle his PT today, since the therapist's booked." Sarah's stomach tightened. She didn't argue. She just stepped outside to get Max's paperwork from her car and to text one word to Will: now. The truth about the Boston Animal Medical Center wasn't written in its mission statement. You wouldn't find it in its glossy brochures or award plaques. It lived in the glances, in the jokes no one challenged, in the way purebred animals were fussed over like Fabergé eggs, while rescues were tolerated like old shoes someone had forgotten to throw away. It lived in that cold room, in the slow pour of soda, in the way no one stopped it and it was about to end, because the man they didn't see coming, the man whose dog they just humiliated, was already parking his car. And unlike them, he didn't measure worth by bloodline. The air inside exam room 3 had shifted. You could feel it in the silence, in the way Max, once quietly alert, now pressed himself into the cold steel table, trembling as if he could vanish into it. His ears flattened, his breathing shallow. His body, still as stone, waited. He knew something bad was coming. Kyle leaned against the door with his arms folded and phone in hand, the lens angled down toward Max. "Look at this thing," he said casually, as though the dog couldn't hear him. "He's got what, 1 leg in each time zone? And people still throw money at it." Dr. Preston sat at the computer, pretending to review files. But her screen was dim. Her eyes weren't on data. They were watching. "Max, some folks just love their sob stories," she said. "Broken dog, broken past, blah, blah, blah. It's all very performative." "Think he knows he's just a prop?" Kyle mused, zooming in. "Sad eyes and stumpy legs. Maybe I'll caption it before the glue factory." That made Megan laugh, a sharp, dissonant sound from the doorway. She stepped inside now, phone in hand, thumbs flying as she typed. "Hey, should I post this to Pound Files or save it for TikTok?" she asked, her grin slicing sideways. This is pure content gold." Max didn't move. He'd been trained, not gently, not kindly, to stay still under pressure. The scars taught him that silence was safer than protest. He flinched only when Megan knelt beside him and ran her hand along the old wounds on his flank. "God, he's so gross up close," she muttered. Kyle chuckled. "You know what would make this viral?" he said, eyes scanning the counter. Then he spotted it, the red can of Coca-Cola beside Dr. Preston's monitor. His grin widened. "Oh, come on," Megan said, watching him. "You're not serious." Kyle looked at Dr. Preston. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just smirked. That was enough. Kyle grabbed the can and gave it a dramatic shake for the camera. "Time for a little hydration, rescue style." Max didn't react until the tab cracked open. Then his body twitched. Just slightly, then the pour. Slow, cruel, intentional. The soda splashed onto his head, running in rivulets down his snout, over his scars, soaking into the patchy fur around his neck. He blinked once, slow, exhausted. He didn't yelp, didn't resist, didn't move. He just endured. Megan was still filming, biting her lip to keep from laughing. Dr. Preston turned away, pretending to study something on her screen. "Make sure you clean it up before she gets back," she said flatly. But it was already too late because the door had opened and Sarah was standing there. For a moment, no one moved. Sarah's hand still rested on the doorknob, the folder she'd fetched from the car forgotten in her grip. Her eyes took in the scene in one sweeping clinical scan. Max. Soaked. Still trembling. The empty can. Kyle's phone still recording. Megan's gleeful fingers. Dr. Preston's frozen indifference. Sarah didn't speak. She walked, slowly, deliberately, to Max's side. Dropped the folder onto the counter. Knelt. She pulled a towel from the drawer and began to wipe Max's face with quiet precision. The German shepherd didn't look at Kyle, or Megan, or even Preston. He looked only at Sarah. The one constant, she didn't speak to him. Just worked. When the worst of the soda had been cleared, she stood, turned to face them. Her voice, when it came, was calm. Too calm. "What have you done?" Preston recovered first. The dog startled Kyle. It was just a reflex. A little soda. "No harm done," Kyle nodded. "Yeah, it was just a joke. I'll clean him up." Sarah stared at them, then she spoke again. Low, precise. "I've been working here nearly a year. I've seen how you treat rescue animals. I've documented every delay, every insult, every act of negligence." She took out her phone. Typed quickly. "And this?" she said. "This was a mistake." Megan rolled her eyes. "You going to cry about it on Twitter? You think anyone's going to care about a charity case getting wet?" Kyle was bolder. "Report us to who? Preston's brother-in-law is on the state vet board. Nothing will happen." "I'm not reporting you to the board," Sarah said quietly. She checked her watch. "In exactly..." She paused. 10 minutes, you'll understand." Now there was tension. Real tension. Megan's fingers slowed. Kyle shifted his weight. Dr. Preston, for the first time, looked up from her screen. "What happens in 10 minutes?" she asked, trying to sound bored. Sarah met her gaze. "You poured soda over the most important patient this clinic has ever treated?" Dr. Preston laughed. "Please. He's a rescue mutt. You barely cover the subsidized fees." Sarah didn't blink. "His owner is William Hartman." The name dropped like a stone into still water. Even Megan went pale. "You're bluffing," Kyle said, but his voice had lost its swagger. "Why would someone like him have that?" Sarah stepped toward him. "Because 3 years ago, Max saved his life, and in about 8 minutes he's going to walk through that door. And when he does, he's not going to ask what happened. He's going to ask who let it happen." Silence. Megan looked at Dr. Preston, eyes wide now. "What if it's true?" Dr. Preston's professional mask cracked. Just a little. Her fingers trembled over the keyboard. She pulled up Max's file, eyes scanning, and stopping cold at the treatment notes, at the private donor flag, at the encrypted directives. "No," she whispered. "No, this can't be right." Sarah crossed her arms. "You didn't even look the first time. Just saw a scarred body and dismissed him." "We didn't know," Kyle said. "That's exactly the point," Sarah replied, another beat, then Megan moved. "I'm calling maintenance. We need to clean this room. We need to..." Sarah held up a hand. "Don't bother. In 6 minutes, he'll see everything he needs to see." Dr. Preston snapped. "You set this up. I gave you a year to prove." "You were better than your reputation," Sarah said, "and you proved you weren't." She turned back to Max, who had slowly stood, shaken himself off as best he could, and now stood tall despite the trembling. "You didn't just betray a patient," she added without looking at them. "You betrayed your oath." Then she turned back, and her voice, still quiet, cut sharper than any scream. "You've made a terrible mistake." Outside, a sleek black Tesla pulled into the parking lot. It moved without urgency, like a blade being unsheathed in slow motion. No screeching brakes, no honking. Just quiet inevitability. From the window of exam room 3, Megan saw it first. Her lips parted. Oh my God. The Tesla glided into the reserved space marked private donor, do not tow. No one had ever seen a car park there. Until now. Kyle stepped back from Max. Dr. Preston stood stiffly beside the examination table, her hands twitching at her sides. It can't be. But it was. The doors opened in tandem. First, a tall man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit stepped out, 6'3", salt and pepper beard, gray eyes the color of steel cables. He looked like someone who didn't need to say anything to be obeyed. Behind him, two individuals in black stepped out. Security, obviously. And trailing close behind were two more. Attorneys in dark navy and gray, briefcases in hand. No one spoke, but everyone watching knew. This wasn't a visit. This was a reckoning. The soft click of the exam room door was louder than a gunshot. William Hartman didn't stride in. He entered, with the kind of presence that fills a room before the man, even crosses the threshold, eyes locked, shoulders back, gaze sweeping. Max turned, and in an instant and in one heartbeat and he changed. The trembling vanished. The hunch in his shoulders disappeared. His ears perked. His eyes brightened. He stepped forward, 3 legs strong, and let out a soft whine of pure recognition. Sarah moved aside. Max went to him. Will dropped to one knee without hesitation. The $1,000 suit didn't matter. The cameras in the hallway didn't matter. The watching eyes didn't matter. He wrapped both arms around the scarred dog and held him like he would never let go. Max buried his face into Will's chest, licking his chin, tail wagging like it hadn't wagged in weeks. Nobody moved. Then Will looked up, straight at Sarah. What happened? 2 words flat, controlled, dangerous, Sarah answered without blinking. They poured Coca-Cola over him, while filming. No embellishment, no dramatics, just truth. Will stood slowly, one hand still resting on Max's head. He turned, faced them. Dr. Preston, Kyle, Megan, you did this? He asked. His voice was quiet, too quiet. Mr. Hartman, Preston began. There's been a... I asked. He interrupted. If you poured soda on my dog while filming it for entertainment. Kyle stepped forward, all his charm evaporated. Sir, it got out of hand. It wasn't meant. Show me the video, Will said coldly. Kyle's face blanched. I deleted it. Of course you did. He turned to his attorneys. Obstruction? Absolutely, the woman in navy said. But we'll recover the file. Mr. Hartman owns the servers. All clinic communications are monitored per contract. Dr. Preston's face turned ashen. You can't do that, Megan stammered. Will finally gave a small smile. I can and I will, Sarah stepped forward. This is Max's regular clinic, she said. You were chosen because of your reputation for excellence and ethics. She didn't have to say the rest. Will looked at her. How long? I've been logging incidents for 6 months. I kept it all private until today. He nodded, then turned back to the 3 faces lined against the wall like condemned statues. I was scheduled to tour this facility at 4:30 today, he said, to finalize a $100 million donation to expand your rehab center. Kyle swayed. Megan gasped. Dr. Preston gripped the counter behind her. Will continued. The board recommended this location, said it was ideal, said the staff was exceptional, but what they failed to mention, he gestured to Max, was the cultural rot at the heart of your kingdom. Megan looked to Preston, but the chief vet said nothing. Will went on. I trusted this place with the most important living being in my life. And you, he stared directly at Preston, treated him like garbage. Dr. Preston finally spoke. I didn't know he was yours. That's the problem, Will said. He never should have needed to be mine to deserve basic compassion. He turned to his lawyers. Terminate them. All 3, effective immediately. Prepare statements for the board and the media. Kyle sputtered. Wait, sir, Mr. Hartman, this is our career. And Max is my life, Will said. He looked down. At the dog, this animal pulled me back from the edge. You humiliated him for sport, one of the lawyers added. Their contracts allow immediate dismissal for cause. All devices are subject to data recovery. Additionally, there are provisions for reputational damages should donor assets be compromised. Preston's lips parted, maybe to argue, maybe to beg. But Will wasn't done. He took a step forward, his presence heavy, measured. I invested in this facility because I believed in its potential, in the promise that even the most broken could be healed here. He looked at Max. Now I wonder if that belief was misplaced. Sarah finally spoke. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it just needs a reset. Will nodded slowly. I intend to give. 1. He turned to the attorneys. Set up a meeting with the board today. Dr. Preston will be placed on immediate suspension pending review. The donation is frozen until further notice. Megan burst into tears. Kyle turned red, then pale. Dr. Preston just stared at the floor. At her legacy collapsing, Will turned to Sarah. Take Max home, get him cleaned, fed, I'll handle the rest. She nodded, gently clipped on his leash. Max followed, tail low but steady. Before she left, she glanced back and saw what Will had already made clear. The power in the room had shifted, and none of them, Preston, Kyle, Megan, would ever hold it again. The staff meeting was called at 3:45 p.m. By 4 hour, every available employee of Boston Animal Medical Center had been summoned to the main conference room. The room that usually hosted catered lunches and sterile board updates now buzzed with dread. They all knew something had happened. They just didn't know what. At the head of the room stood William Hartman, jacket off, sleeves rolled, flanked by 2 attorneys and Dr. James Anderson, the center's founder and now silent observer. Sarah sat to the side, not as a guest, not as a bystander, as witness. Max wasn't there. He was home, clean, resting, safe. The rest of them weren't. Thank you for coming on short notice, Will began, voice calm, yet sharp enough to cut glass. I'll be brief. Some of you already know what happened today. Some of you will find out now. But make no mistake, none of you will leave this room the same. Murmurs rippled across the crowd. Will continued. 3 of your colleagues, Dr. Victoria Preston, Kyle Thompson, and Megan Riley, have been terminated. Effective immediately. Gasps, not whispers, gasps, audible, open-mouthed. They were caught on video humiliating a rescue patient during an examination. The dog was physically intact, but emotionally vulnerable, scarred, 3-legged. And under this facility's care, he paused. And he happens to be mine. Dead silence. Let me clarify something for those of you whispering, Will said, pacing slowly. This isn't about me. It's about the culture I've uncovered here. A culture where an animal's value is measured not by its pain or prognosis, but by its price tag. No one dared meet his eyes. The male attorney stepped forward, a heavy binder in hand. Over the past 6 months, a quiet internal investigation has taken place, led by Sarah Martinez. Every incident of neglect or mistreatment toward rescue animals has been logged, dated, cross-referenced. He opened the binder. There are 47 entries. The woman beside him tapped a tablet. A screen lit up behind them. Slide after slide appeared. Screenshots of messages between staff, billing inconsistencies, time-stamped appointment delays, photos of neglected rescue patients waiting for care while designer pets were fast-tracked. The staff watched their own sins unfold in real time. Some cried, some looked away, some looked relieved, as if they'd carried guilt they were too afraid to name. I don't expect perfection, Will said. But I expect accountability and compassion. He stopped at the center of the room. Let me tell you why this matters. He turned slightly, voice quieter now, but stronger. 3 years ago, I nearly took my own life. My wife and daughter were killed in a boating accident. I had nothing left, until I met Max. He didn't need to say more. His voice carried what his words didn't. The room was utterly still. I brought him here because this clinic was supposed to represent the best in veterinary care. What I found instead was a caste system. He looked out across the rows of employees. And today, that ends. Dr. Preston wasn't in the room. Neither were Kyle or Megan. But their absence was felt. Because Will didn't just end their employment. He ended the shield that had protected them. The state veterinary board has already been notified, said the woman attorney. Their licenses are under review. Legal proceedings may follow, and Pinnacle Medical Group has begun a top-down review of this facility's practices. Will crossed his arms. That includes every appointment, every billing line, every social media post tied to this clinic. Whispers began again. And yes, he added, my $100 million donation has been withdrawn. Indefinitely. Gasps. Again, someone choked back a sob. But not because I've given up on this place. Will looked at Sarah. It's because I need to rebuild it. From within. He nodded toward Dr. Anderson, who stepped up with a weary but resolute smile. As founder and former chief of this center, I've agreed to return in an interim role to oversee reform, he said. Effective immediately, all patient care will be prioritized by medical urgency, not breed, not billing rate, not background. He turned to Sarah. And this woman, who most of you underestimated, will now serve as Director of Rehabilitation Services. Sarah blinked. This wasn't discussed. Will smiled. You've already been doing the job. It's time your title caught up. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It wasn't loud, but it was real, genuine. From the staff who had watched Sarah work quietly for months, unnoticed, unacknowledged, and now undeniable. After the meeting, people approached her. The nurse who once apologized for how long Max had to wait. The intern who'd stayed late to give a rescue dog her vaccines. Even a receptionist, not Megan, who whispered, "We saw what was happening. We just didn't know what to do." Sarah nodded. She didn't judge them. She understood fear. But now there was no more room for silence. In Dr. Preston's now vacated office, Will sat with Dr. Anderson and Sarah, reviewing final transition plans. The new wing will still happen, Will said, tapping the floor plan, but not under the current name. Anderson raised a brow. You're renaming the building? Will smiled. I'm naming it after Max. Sarah's eyes flickered. The Max Hartman Rehabilitation Wing. She didn't say anything. She just smiled. The first full smile anyone had seen on her face since she started working here. Later, as the staff cleared out and the sun dipped behind the Boston skyline, Will stood alone in the lobby. He looked out through the glass doors and saw his reflection beside a ghost of Max's silhouette. He whispered to the air, "We're not done. Not even close." And deep inside the walls of a facility built on prestige and privilege, the quiet hum of transformation had already begun. Victoria Preston hadn't left her house in 3 days. Her phone had stopped ringing. At first, it was full of angry voicemails and media inquiries. Then, silence. Even her brother-in-law, the one who once called her untouchable, had gone quiet after forwarding her the board's emergency hearing schedule. She sat on the edge of her guest room bed, not her own. She couldn't bear to go in there. Still in the same gray slacks and blouse she'd worn to the meeting where Will Hartman destroyed everything. The blinds were drawn. The air was stale. A coffee cup from 3 days ago stood forgotten on the windowsill. She hadn't drunk it, just like she hadn't cried. Victoria Preston didn't cry. The boy's name was Michael. He was 6 when it happened. They were visiting a friend's home outside Boston. Victoria had just finished her residency at Harvard's animal care program and was beaming with the kind of pride only a woman with something to prove could carry. She hadn't noticed the dog, a German shepherd, a rescue. Her friend had gushed about how sweet he was, how much he had changed. Michael had wandered into the backyard with a juice box. The next sound Victoria heard was the scream. She ran outside barefoot, blood everywhere. The dog had latched onto Michael's leg, shaking, growling, primal. By the time she tore him away, her son's femur had snapped. It took 2 surgeries, 48 stitches, and a skin graft to save his leg. It took 2 years before he stopped waking up screaming. It took none of that for Victoria to decide. Rescue animals were dangerous. Their stories were unreliable. Their rehabilitation exaggerated. Their behavior? A ticking time bomb beneath a glossy adoption pamphlet. That belief, small and silent, burrowed into her like rot beneath paint. At first, she masked it with triage logic. Resources were limited. Priorities had to be made. Medical necessity, financial viability. But that wasn't the truth, not really. The truth was, she stopped seeing rescue animals as patients. She saw them as risks, distractions, threats, especially if they looked like him, scarred, big, quiet. German shepherds, most of all. She never said it aloud, but when Max arrived, limping, scarred, dignified, it was like being yanked backward in time. Back to blood on the grass, back to the moment she couldn't stop the bite from sinking in. And so she punished him, not violently, but with indifference, contempt, the slow bleed of withheld empathy. Max had become the mirror she couldn't look into, so she cracked it, over and over again. Victoria sat on the guest bed with her son's childhood photo in her lap. He was 18 now, at college, studying environmental law. He didn't remember much about the attack, but she did. She remembered everything. A soft knock on the front door startled her. She didn't move. A few seconds later, a paper slid through the mail slot. She waited until she heard the retreating steps before she crossed the hallway. Picked it up and unfolded it. From William Hartman. She almost didn't read it, but she did. Victoria, I imagine silence is deafening in your house now. I remember that silence, after the accident, when grief is so thick, even breath feels like betrayal. I won't pretend to understand your full story, but I suspect the cruelty you showed Max didn't begin with him. Trauma doesn't vanish. It buries itself in habits, in systems, in institutions. You built one. The question is, what do you do now that it's broken? If you want to talk, not to excuse, not to reclaim a title, but to confront, I'll be at the clinic tomorrow, at 10 a.m. Bring nothing, just honesty. Will Victoria stared at the letter for a long time, and for the first time in years, she cried. Not the stoic tears she'd shed at Michael's bedside. Real ones, the kind that came from remembering who she used to be. The next morning she dressed in plain clothes. No makeup, no mask. When she arrived, the lobby of the clinic looked different. The air was warmer. The front desk staff smiled at her, warily but not cruelly. She didn't correct them, didn't demand anything. She waited. At exactly 10 vor, the door to exam room 3 opened. Will Hartman stood in the threshold, his eyes unreadable. No Max, no lawyers, no audience, just a chair, and a man who had once buried his pain the same way she had. In silence, "Come in," he said. They sat across from each other. Neither spoke first. Then finally, "I thought I hated him," she whispered. But it wasn't him. Will didn't nod. Didn't judge. He waited. "My son was attacked by a dog like Max, a rescue. I thought he was safe. I believed what they said, that he'd been rehabilitated, that he was gentle." Her fingers curled in her lap. 2 years of surgeries, therapy. I carried it for him. I carried it through him. I built rules around it, a whole system. And Max? Will asked softly. She laughed, bitter and broken. He just looked too much like the one that bit Michael. Will leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Trauma ripples outward," he said. "That's what I've learned." She nodded. "Sometimes becomes policy." Will said nothing. She looked at him. "What do you do when you realize the monster was you?" He didn't flinch. "You stop the ripple." She closed her eyes. "I can't fix what I did." "No," Will agreed. "But you can choose what comes next." Victoria reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. "Every rescue case I mismanaged. Every animal that received less than they deserved. I've compiled it all. I've submitted it to the board. I've also surrendered my veterinary license. Voluntarily." Will took the drive. He didn't thank her. That wasn't what she was looking for. She stood, paused at the door, then looked back. Max still trusted me, even after what I did. He let me touch him, let me speak. Why? Will smiled faintly. "That's just who he is." Victoria's voice cracked. "Maybe I could learn." Six months later, The facility had changed so much it was barely recognizable. The gleaming marble floors remained, but now they were matched by walls lined with framed photos, not of celebrity clients or championship breeds, but of survivors. Pitbull in a wheelchair, a one-eyed calico curled up in the arms of a hospice patient, a blind golden retriever guiding a nervous child into an exam room. At the front, above the new double doors, a sign carved in smooth dark wood read, "The Max, Hartman Rehabilitation Wing." Underneath, "Because no life is too broken to mend." The grand reopening was packed. News cameras lined the sidewalks. Local politicians mingled awkwardly with animal behaviorists and shelter volunteers. But the most important guest of the day arrived in silence, walking with a careful, balanced, "Get across the brick courtyard." Max, now fitted with a sleek, custom prosthetic, the German shepherd moved with quiet grace, a veteran of pain turned ambassador of healing. He didn't bark. He didn't need to. Every eye followed him. Every hand hesitated just long enough to ask for permission. At his side, Sarah Martinez walked like someone finally seen. Behind them, William Hartman, tieless in a pressed blue shirt, sleeves rolled, face lighter than anyone had seen it in years, smiled at the animal that had saved his life. The ribbon-cutting ceremony took place beneath the spring sun. Will stood at the podium and addressed the gathered crowd. "This wing isn't just about recovery," he said. "It's about redemption, not just for animals, but for the humans who failed them." He turned slightly, nodding toward the edge of the crowd. Dr. Victoria Preston stepped forward. Gone were the high heels, the lab coat, the armor of perfection. She wore a simple dress, no makeup, and a small pendant around her neck. A paw print. Charm. "I don't deserve to stand here," she said softly, voice picked up by the mic. "But I'm here anyway, because I caused harm, and I don't want to hide from it anymore." There was a pause. "I let fear make me cruel. I let trauma become policy. And I let a three-legged dog remind me of what I lost, instead of what he still carried. Resilience, trust, grace." She reached into her pocket and held up a folded piece of paper. "This is my formal surrender of my veterinary license. I have submitted it to the board, and I will not return to clinical practice. But I will dedicate the rest of my life to education, advocacy, and helping vet professionals confront their own bias before it costs an animal its dignity." Then she stepped aside, and Max walked to her. He placed his head gently against her leg, and the crowd, breath held in disbelief, exhaled together. Some cried. Sarah did. Victoria wept openly, one hand resting on Max's head, as if asking forgiveness. She would never demand with words. Inside the new wing, the first official tour began. Sarah led the way through rooms designed for trauma-responsive care. Quiet spaces with muted lighting, aromatherapy, textured flooring for nervous paws. She paused in one room. A plaque outside read, "The Megan Riley Comfort Suite." Journalists exchanged glances. "Isn't that—" It was. Standing inside the suite, organizing blankets into neat stacks, Megan Riley looked different. No phone in hand, no smile for the cameras. Just quiet focus, Sarah introduced her. After her termination, Megan began volunteering at city shelters, she explained. Cleaning kennels, no social media, just showing up. Will had noticed. After a month, he offered her a second chance. Not in administration, but in the heart of the thing she once mocked. Rescue. Today, Megan coordinates animal visitation programs for trauma survivors, senior homes, pediatric wards, women's shelters. She didn't seek forgiveness. She earned trust, slowly, quietly, like healing should be. In the education hall, a display board highlighted the work of a new outreach division. Its title, The Kyle Thompson Initiative for Ethical Media in Animal Care. Wait, Kyle? A young vet assistant whispered. Yes. The same Kyle who once hashtagged Rescue Fail now led seminars in middle schools, teaching students how to use social platforms responsibly when showcasing animals, and when to put the phone down altogether. He cop. Hadn't wanted the program named after him, Will had insisted. Not to glorify, he'd told him, but to remind. Kyle now worked quietly behind the scenes, processing adoption applications, coordinating rescue transport, never asking to be in the spotlight. But the work mattered, the change mattered, and it was real. In the genetics lab next to the diagnostics wing, something even more unexpected was taking place. Dr. James Anderson, now semi-retired but sharp as ever, stood before a group of press reporters and explained calmly, "We recently discovered a rare antibody in Max's blood. It appears to target certain pediatric cancer cell lines with promising aggression." Gasps. Will stepped in to clarify. "Let me be clear. We are proceeding with strict ethical guidelines. No invasive procedures. Max's comfort and health are our priority. But through harmless sampling, we've developed a synthetic version." He paused. "It's going into clinical trial next month. Max, the dog they once called damaged goods, might soon help save children's lives. And speaking of children, there was one last scheduled stop. A small girl in a wheelchair waited by the garden entrance, flanked by nurses. Emma, 7 years old, diagnosed with acute leukemia last year. She hadn't spoken since the second round of chemo. Her mother stood behind her, hand trembling slightly on her shoulder. As the crowd watched, Max approached, slow, gentle, ears tilted forward. Emma's eyes widened. Her fingers curled around the armrest. Max stopped beside her chair and rested his head on her knee. She didn't pull back. She didn't look afraid. She reached, slowly, carefully, and placed her tiny hand on his scarred head. Then, she smiled. Her lips moved. No one could hear what she said. But her mother's gasp and the tears streaming down her face told everyone enough. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. It was enough to witness it. Enough to know that the broken could become whole again. Not by returning to who they were, but by becoming something new, something forged by pain and purpose. Will stood beside Sarah, watching from a distance. "Did you hear what she said?" Sarah whispered. "No," he said. "What?" Sarah's voice was barely audible. She said, "He looks like me." Will turned to look at Max, standing proudly beside the girl in the wheelchair, tail softly wagging, eyes steady. Then he looked back at Sarah. "And maybe that's the greatest gift," he said. "He doesn't just survive, he shows others how to." There are animals who endure, and then there are those who transform. Max was both. When he first limped into the Boston Animal Medical Center, scarred and silent, no one saw him. Not really. They saw what was missing. A leg, an eye, a pedigree. They didn't see the steady resilience in his gait. They didn't see the quiet intelligence in his amber eyes. They didn't see the heart that had pulled one of the world's most powerful men back from the edge of despair. But now they saw. Max didn't just heal. He healed others. A girl who hadn't smiled in months. A veteran haunted by ghosts. A nurse grieving a parent she couldn't save. One by one, Max sat beside them. Said nothing. Demanded nothing. He simply offered his presence. And somehow that was enough. People say Boston changed after the incident. The clinic certainly did. Not just in policy, but in soul. More rescue animals were brought in than ever before. More community outreach. More low-income owners walking through the same doors that once made them feel small. And through it all, Max remained. Not a mascot, but a mentor. He didn't know what a second chance meant in human terms. He only knew that pain wasn't something to fear. It was something to walk beside. He saved Will. Now, he saved others. One evening, after the last therapy session of the day, Sarah found him in the garden. Max sat beside a stone bench, tail curled around his prosthetic, eyes following the last rays of sunlight. A child in a hospital gown walked quietly toward him, uncertain, cautious. Max didn't move. He waited. And when the child reached out, trembling, he leaned forward just enough for their hands to meet. It wasn't dramatic. There were no violins, no gasps, just one small moment between two broken things learning how to trust the world again. Maybe that's what Max had been doing all along, not teaching us how to fix what's broken, but how to love it anyway, how to sit in the dark with someone until the light feels safe again, how to lead not with noise or dominance but with patience, how to heal by simply being there. We often think of courage as something loud, but sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply to trust again. If Max's story moved you, don't let it stop here. There are more animals like him, more people like Sarah, more stories waiting to be told. So subscribe, leave a comment, and tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit the bell because the next story might be closer to home than you think. We'll see you soon. Until then, stay kind and stay brave. Bottom of form.